So presentation is a bit of an overview of what we do and how we can support groups to find volunteers and the work that we do with individuals looking for volunteering. So the volunteering landscape across Wales, it's tough at the moment, and that is reflected up and down the country. There is a nationwide shortage of volunteers, and that's whether that is skilled volunteers, generic volunteers, trustees. That it's recognised that it's quite tough at the moment. During COVID, lots of people were furloughed, and there was lots, but the fulcrum was tipped, and there wasn't many opportunities. Of course, that's changed, and it's very much the other way now. But what we recognise is that everybody's needs are different. Particularly in Newport, Newport is a thriving, vibrant, culturally fantastic mix of groups. Whether your grassroots groups, charities, CICs, each group's needs are going to be completely different when it comes to volunteers and the types of volunteers needed. Me and Kelly, we meet a lot of people, and whether those volunteers are skilled volunteers, so they could be university students, they could be people who've retired and have got very kind of niche experience. We meet people that volunteer for different reasons. They might be socially isolated, and actually volunteering is an opportunity to connect with people, and we see that quite often, as well as people who, they've got academic qualifications, but they need the experience. So there's a lot of different reasons why people volunteer, and particularly with youth volunteering as well. I mean, that's your bag as well, Kelly.
Yes. So exactly like Sam said, it could be young people from school that I can support into opportunities. It could be doing a college course, Welsh Back, Duke of Edinburgh. All of those young people could come to us and say, can I have a volunteering opportunity for sometimes 15 hours, sometimes one day a week, sometimes, every weekend, whatever they can give. But that's part of what we can do as well to support them.
So Kelly mentioned around the governance and the type of support that we can provide. So this might look like, in practice, working with groups to develop volunteering policies.
Yeah, so we can also help with codes of conduct. So this is sort of an overview of anything that you feel you might not have quite in place, or maybe is a little bit out of date and you want it to be reviewed. These are the sorts of things we can help with.
Yeah, so there are things like volunteer agreements,
induction processes, DBS checks, things like that.
Yeah, so whilst we don't do DBS checks ourselves, we can signpost to organisations that can. We look at volunteer retention as well, so we can work with groups around ways of retaining volunteers, because volunteers are a very precious commodity, and it can be attritional sometimes that people come and they leave. So we're quite keen to work with people to retain volunteers.
And then just reasonable adjustments. So you might have volunteers who are keen to come along and support your group or your organisation, but they just have some needs that you need to work with, and then you might not know where to start, or they might not be very transparent with it. So we can just sort of help with that conversation, really, so that they feel that they are comfortable whilst they're volunteering.
So we work with organisations quite a bit around designing their volunteering roles, or their kind of volunteer job descriptions, I guess, really. And the types of things we look at is thinking about, what do you want volunteers to do in your group? Sometimes we meet people that, some fantastic ideas, but what the picture of what they want a volunteer to look like is the bit that needs kind of carving out, I guess, really.
And that can also just relate to skills, knowledge, and experience. So you may say, I don't need any prior qualifications of this person, but I just need them to be great at welcoming our guests and just be a real lovely people person. And that's just a nice little role to advertise. And you're not then expecting people to try and fit themselves into a square hole if they're a round plug. That's the expression.
We look at maybe looking at ways how groups can incentivize roles as well. Cost of living crisis, it makes it incredibly difficult, and so we might look at ways of making that volunteering opportunity so much more worthwhile. So whether it is looking at training and kind of development for volunteers, whether it could be, you know, could be references, it could be career progression into paid employment. So, you know, I placed a volunteer at the place, and now they work here, you know, so it's looking at ways, creative ways to try and retain those volunteers and make the experience all worthwhile.
And we touched on it as well, just a little bit of advice and help with role descriptions, so we can help sort of carve out what a role could look like and help with the advertising of that.
Yeah, so it might be, yeah, often people come to us with ideas, send us drafts, and then we can kind of work with groups to make some suggestions, and might be helping with templates and those kinds of things as well. Okay, so developing your volunteers. So one thing that we're quite keen to do is identify training needs. So I mentioned before that, you know, sometimes people want to hit the ground running and achieve some great things, but sometimes, you know, people do need to kind of identify what it is they want to do and where those opportunities are to develop volunteers.
Yeah, and then that's also helping them to find training opportunities. So often they'll know what they want to train up on and what they want to learn, what courses they want to attend. They just don't know where to find that information, so we can help with that.
Yeah. So what Gavo also does is we run a volunteer recognition scheme, and what this does is it awards volunteers for set blocks of hours, and that can be particularly helpful for going into paid employment. So it's almost like a volunteer being able to say, well, actually, I've committed 100 hours, 500 hours, 50, whatever those hours are. It's a tangible mark of someone's commitment, because what we find is, particularly working with students, university students, you know, it's a very level playing field. You know, you finish university, you've got a very kind of similar grade qualification rules. It's very competitive out there. What sets you apart from the rest? And very often volunteering is that key in the door, because it shows a level of commitment, you know, and if someone can show, well, actually, I give my time up to do this, and this is the benefit of it, and being able to quantify that can be really quite an attractive prospect.
And collaboration with other groups. So like this is a perfect example of where you can collaborate now, learn about what you're all doing. Volunteers aren't owned by groups, are they? So they can volunteer for you, but they can volunteer for someone else as well. So you may be able to share that volunteer, introduce one another, talk about how great they've been for you and whether they've got something they can offer to another group. And I think it's that sort of collaboration rather than precious about who's volunteering for us.
Mm-hmm. And thinking about it from a volunteer's point of view, you know, if they're gaining skills and experience with this group, they could also gain it from this group, and you know, it's a win-win, because it brings capacity, and it also serves as, you know, skills experience for the volunteer. We've touched on reasonable adjustments to accommodate kind of specific needs. Really, this is something that we can support groups to do. It might be that we do this by signposting to other groups who might be better placed to do it, but it's something that we can work with groups with.
So promoting roles. So there is a real gift in how you get those roles promoted and get them to be appealing, I guess, to the volunteers out there. And that's something that we can again help you with. So just using Gavo really as like your sharing platform. So we've got social media, we've got numerous newsletters that go out. You know, if you feel like you're not quite reaching those volunteers through your own networks and your own social media or websites, then please come to us and say, can you help spread that word for us?
Yep. So, you know, we've got collaborative networks as well. So, you know, our colleagues don't just sit within community development and volunteering. You know, we've got colleagues in health, social care and well-being. You know, there's specific projects within Gavo. You know, so we've got our fingers in a lot of pies. So, you know, very often people come to me and go, I wish there was this opportunity. I'm thinking, oh, I don't know about that. But then chances if I don't or Kelly doesn't, another colleague will. So that's the great thing, that, you know, these networks are very fruitful in that respect.
And also just thinking about your local schools that you can connect with. So a lot of schools now are sending out sometimes weekly newsletters, and at the bottom of their newsletters, they've got community sections. See if you can plug that, get that, because that goes out across their whole school, all the parents, all the children. So wherever your services or your offers are, see if you can link in with your local school and help boost advertising that way.
We also use a platform called Volunteering Wales, and this is a platform that's been developed by the WCVA. And this is almost like a bit of an auto trader for volunteering, I guess, really. So a large part of what me and Kelly do is supporting groups to get their opportunities on there, because it's free for both organisations to register, and it's free for volunteers to register as well. And how it works is that volunteers will organisations will set themselves up on this platform, and then they can basically post what they're looking for, and then we often signpost people to it. It's a great opportunity for groups to then kind of, I don't want to use the word gatekeep, but you can see who's signing up. You can then kind of manage that volunteer recruitment then from Volunteering Wales itself. We also use the University of South Wales platform, so we can share stuff on their network. And so particularly for students who are looking for placements, perhaps you're looking for maybe skilled volunteers, that can be a really good way of casting your net wider for volunteers.
And if there's a week to advertise on Volunteering Wales, it's this week during Volunteers Week, because that's where everybody is thinking about volunteering, and they're going to go to Volunteering Wales to look at what's in their local area. So this week's probably the perfect week if you want to get started with that.
Yeah. And if any groups need any support or assistance with getting set up on Volunteering Wales, then we can certainly assist with that. Okay, so volunteering MOT, it's got nothing to do with cars. But what a volunteering MOT is simply, it's a checklist of questions, and it can range from looking what kind of policies and organisations got in place that are specifically for volunteering or voluntary activity. And it could go anything from the policies, it could look at induction processes, it could look at how you reward your volunteers, it could look at how you promote your opportunities. And it's quite an informal process. So, sit down and we can go through what's in place, what's not, what you would like. There might be some things there that are really not applicable to your organisation. And it's an opportunity to review where you're at and where perhaps you might want to be. And it's not you're doing this right or you're doing that wrong. It's a reflective process, I guess. And what it serves at is carving out a bit of a roadmap of how you want to get from point A to point B. And you can put kind of short-term, medium and long-term goals in place. And some of these things that we can, action points that we can work collaboratively with. But yeah, each one is different. And it can really help in kind of getting to where you want to be. And if you are interested, that's something that I'm more than happy to help groups with. I'm going to plug it shamelessly. I've got a volunteering surgery coming up this Friday at the place. So it might be an ideal opportunity for anyone who's interested to come along and have a chat about these things. But I'll explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, because it could be that you don't need a volunteer now, but being proactive with volunteer recruitment is something that we promote, because otherwise you're always on the back foot. You're always trying to find a volunteer when you really need a volunteer, and they never seem to come along, do they? So, during that MOT, you might identify that there's going to be a future project and you could do with a couple of volunteers, and we can get that ball rolling for you so that when the time comes, you've put all that legwork into the promotion, the advertising, and hopefully you'll have them sort of ready at your door to get going with you. So it's a really helpful tool if you need to work with Sam or myself on that. So connecting with volunteers, we meet volunteers from all walks of life at different stages of volunteering experience as well. So they could be the general inquiries that just come directly to us. That could be email, telephone calls, all of our details are on the Gather website, so we can be contacted in a number of ways directly.
Yeah, so we often attend events at colleges and universities, so that can be a great way to connect with students. So we get a lot of inquiries that way.
And then referrals from external agencies, so the job centre, the probation service, the police, you name it. We've had some phone calls to say, would you be able to support these people into volunteering?
Yeah, Careers Wales, there's lots of different avenues, organisations like GDAS and things like that, because volunteering can be a real integral step to somebody's next step or onward step in their life, and volunteering can have a massive impact in that respect. And corporates, so that's probably more my bag, I'd say. I get approached a lot by businesses wanting to do good in the community, which we'll touch on in a minute. And yeah, that can be really helpful for projects and things like that. But we generally, when we meet people, we have usually in quite an informal conversation, just to find out what makes people tick, to find out what their aspirations are, what their interests are, what experience they've had, but also someone might have some potential barriers. It could be a language barrier, it could be a disability, but finding out what those are so we can overcome those to be more inclusive.
Yeah, so as Sam said, he does deal with a lot more corporate volunteering. So this is something we can probably explain in a lot more detail, but it's just good for us to build those relationships with organisations and companies that contact us about corporate volunteering, because we then don't see that as a one-off opportunity. We've got that relationship that we can continue working on, and that could bring later on great skills exchanges, which is needed in the community, or even sponsorship. So
yeah, so I mean, corporate volunteering stereotypically is good for lots of muscle power to do a project, but a lot of businesses want it to be more sustainable instead of coming along litter picking or painting a fence. So take, for example, building societies. What an ideal opportunity to have a building society come along and talk about business planning or financial forecasting and things like that. So that's a really good use of their time, and it has more of a sustainable impact on the groups that we work with. And like I say, it can bridge gaps in knowledge as well. And as Kelly said, it helps with future relationships, because it's all about building for the future and how we can, anticipate what we're going to do next, and having, the support from private sector is also very, very important as well, I think.
And we're quite lucky we've got the Celtic Manor on our doorstep, so we sort of help and support they can offer. And they're a wonderful company that can really get involved in community spirit, and they often do. So it's looking at what's on our doorstep really for sponsorship.
Yeah, and you look at things, particularly like University of South Wales. They run a civic engagement scheme. So you think of a university, you've got a large wealth of kind of skills and expertise there. Anything from HR to finance to academics, lots of skills at their disposal there, and people want to do good generally. So we often get inquiries about how groups can harness those. So coming to the end of our presentation, although it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I do apologise. But if anyone does fancy getting in contact with us, like I said, we're always contactable. We've got our contact details on this presentation. Apologies, you need the Hubble Space Telescope to read it. But I've got a volunteering surgery here, like I mentioned on Friday. There is a link to book that. I've left my cards outside, so if anyone wants to drop me an email, if they're interested, I can send them a link, or I'll book it myself on my end. But alternatively, drop me and Kelly an email, a telephone call, and we'd be more than happy to meet up with any group really, and just see how we can support.
Yeah, and then just some resources really. So this will mean much more to you when you have a digital copy, which Dan said he'll kindly share after today's event. So we've just put some links on there to some useful, very up-to-date current policies. They've recently been reviewed by the WCVA, so you know you're working with reliable documents here. So we've got 4 that we've listed, which hopefully you can read them on the screen, but you'll see them in a digital form anyway. As Sam mentioned, just a DBS check website that's going to be useful for you if you need to carry out DBS checks with your volunteers. Also, just thought it'd be helpful to put a safeguarding link on there. So there is the Gwent Safeguarding Board, and also the WCVA offers a lot of safeguarding training. There will be a cost in that, but it's definitely worth looking at if you're interested. They do it at different levels. And then I might as well do a quick plug myself. With it being Volunteers Week, we've launched our Youth Volunteers Fund. So for any of you that don't know what that is, this is a grant that groups and organisations can apply for if they have a volunteer aged between 14 to 25. So this young person can actually sort of lead on a project to provide youth provision in their communities. It's a lovely little opportunity for a young person to have some leadership experience. They can apply for up to £2,000 and it can be supported by an adult who's in that group. And it's a really nice way of getting young people involved in their youth services in their communities. So if you're interested, everything will be on that link for you. The closing date for applications is the 31st of August. So plenty of time, but also, try and get the ball rolling with a young person, get some ideas going, and hopefully you'll have a really nice meaty project to submit an application for.
And finally, I'll just leave you on one thing. So every year, many of you might be aware, we run an annual volunteering awards. And so there are 10 different categories that people can be nominated for. And we are due to launch that imminently. So if you've got any special volunteers, any trustees, anybody that's involved in your organisation that you really would like to put them forward, then keep your eyes peeled and nominate them soon.